Okay, perfect. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Lara. I am the community manager of ELU, and I'm so excited that you're all joining us today, making some time in the middle of your workday for hopefully some thought-provoking discussion and conversation. So while we are getting started, I would already like to welcome all of you to use the chat box down below and introduce yourself. Let us know where you are calling in from so we get a sense of who is on the call. Again, I am the community manager for European Leadership University. What we do as an institution is to try and transform education by offering competency-based programs, specifically in the tech domain. So for example, we have a flagship program, data science. We are now also launching our software engineering program, but that doesn't mean that we don't talk about leadership. We do believe that it's very important for all professionals, including the tech professionals, to also develop their leadership and their interpersonal competencies. And for this reason, we have a leadership bootcamp in any of our programs. And that is also why I'm so excited to be joined by Professor Peter Hawkins today. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's delightful to be with you.
And I think we have a very pressing topic today, talking about resilience and how to source yourself. I think we are all very much impacted and our lives have been changed by the current pandemic. In some ways, maybe more challenging. In other ways, it can be positive changes as well. But I'm sure it has been a time for reflection and kind of pushing ourselves in many ways. So this is why today we will be talking about how we can resource and source ourselves to face challenges like the pandemic, but I'm sure also others. So Peter is a professor of leadership at the Henley Business School at the University of Reading in the UK. He's also the chairman at Renewal Associates and a business leader, coach, and consultant. I know that some of you in the audience are also coaches yourself or have experience with leadership. So we do have some times during the session for interaction and questions. Now you can either use the chat below or you can raise your virtual blue hand in the Zoom controls so that you can indicate that you would like to unmute yourself and speak with your audio. So I can allow for you to also speak with audio. So do make sure to raise your virtual blue hand and we'll do so as well. So thank you again all for joining. Thank you so much, Peter. And without further ado, I'll give the floor to Peter.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today. I've been involved with the European Leadership University since it first was just mooted as an idea through my long friendship with Alper in Turkey, who I've done many talks for in the beautiful city of Istanbul. So it's delightful to be with you as well today. And it's great to see online we've got people. So good evening to those friends who are in the Far East and in Singapore and Hong Kong. Good morning to friends in Europe. Good lunchtime to Benita in Oman. Nice to see you online. And we've got people here from Berlin, Dubai. Anna, nice to see you from Lisbon. So thank you for all of you who put your names in. Oh, and bonjour, Angers from Paris. Welcome to this. We're going to be looking today at how do we resource ourselves to face the great challenges of that our world is facing, both the immediate ones of COVID, but the long-term ones. And like all my talks, I like to start as coaching starts, not with lectures, but with questions. Not just have the questions at the end, but also at the beginning. But what I'm really interested in is not the questions you want to ask, but what is your life requiring you to develop and explore? What's coming over the horizon and is taking you to your learning edge? So just briefly, I invite you just to close your eyes and think of your current life, your current work. And to take a deep breath, perhaps get your seat back in the chair where you can feel really supported, or if you're standing, really feel your connection with the floor. Make sure both feet are flat on the floor. And just feel that sense of being supported. Take a deep breath in through your feet, up from the earth beneath you, up through your body, your legs, your pelvis, your belly. Breathe into your heart and make sure that your heart is strong and open, into your chest, your throat, your mouth, your nose, your face, and then feel your connection up through the top of your head. And then a deep out breath so that you can let go of all that you've been thinking about and doing before you join this call and be fully present. And then take a second breath. And this time think about all the people that your life and work serves. And picture each of them. Your family, your children, grandchildren, brothers, sisters, parents, the people you lead, and colleagues, clients and customers, teams you are part of, organizations that you're involved with or work for. Try and picture them. The stakeholders of those organizations, the investors, customers, employees, partner organizations, and then further out to the communities that support those organizations and are supported by it, where the people live, the infrastructure, the transport, the hospitals, the schools. And then further out to the more than human world. It provides 99+ % of all that makes our life possible. The rivers, the rain, the air we breathe, the earth that grows the food we eat, the trees that absorb the CO2, the sun that gives us warmth, heat. And as you hold that collage of all those stakeholders, please ask yourself, who and what do those people need you to discover this morning so that you can create greater value for all those people, communities, ecologies? And what's the development they need you to have? What questions do they need you to ask? When you're ready, just begin to open your eyes and jot down the question, or feel free to put the question in the chat box. Questions that your stakeholders need you to ask, or a capacity they need you to develop to be more fully in relationship to that great ripples of systems and people that your work serves. And while they're doing that, can you just, as I haven't quite get to the chat box, could you just let me know what questions or comments are coming in? Just read out a few for me. Yeah, can you?
And a quick reminder to everyone, when you are sending a message on the chat, please make sure you're sending it to all the panelists and attendees, so also the other people in the audience can see your comments.
Right. So if there are any coming in, any questions from your stakeholders or any capacities that they need you to develop to be great in service to them, please put them in the chat box, which you'll find by clicking right down at the bottom if you haven't found it already. While those are coming in, perhaps we'll come back to those while we're waiting for those.
I think we have a question from Amin. Amin, thank you so much. How are we going to navigate through this pandemic, and how can we envision the near future? Or from Anna, it requires from me to be more fully present and conscious of my choices.
Great. So
how to help people wake up, how to get from consciousness to action, from Antje.
And then there's one just come in, I can see it. How will you support our employee? How will we support our employees and help them create the same impact whilst working online? Right, a challenge that I had this morning. How my unique place and contribution to the work I'm involved in. I love that, Lata. No, it was Earl. How to help people adapt and thrive. How to increase our contribution to this world. Lovely, lovely questions. The one about Earl, about our unique place, I often say one of the most important questions we can ask is, what is it we can uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs? What can we uniquely do? And our uniqueness, some people say to me, well, I'm not unique, but all of us, nobody occupies the place in this wider system that you occupy, Earl. Nobody has the mixture of experience that you have, or the network of connections that you have. And we'll be coming back to that as we look at resilience. But let's just move on to look at, I love this quote from Gregory Bateson: the most important task today is perhaps to learn to think in a new way. The challenges of the world cannot be dealt with by 20th century thinking. We all have to discover what is 21st century thinking, 21st century relating, and 21st century being. In a recent dialogue, which is on our website, that I did with my good colleague and friend Giles Hutchins, he's written some very good books on regenerative leadership, books on the nature of business. How do we do work the way nature operates? We shared in this dialogue what we see as 7 interconnected challenges. They're all important, but the most important thing is that they are all interconnected. We cannot just deal with one of those as an individual separate problem. We have to deal with them in an integrated way. Climate emergency, air, sea and soil degradation, loss of biodiversity, monoculture and control, that we as human beings, faced with challenges, try and go into control rather than participation and partnership. Increased mental distress, the rates of mental health, mental illness and mental distress are increasing globally. In fact, there's this shocking statistic that now more people, more men between 16 and 40 die through suicide than die through all wars and murder put together globally. And then we have the whole area of racism, sexism, human prejudice, othering of other sorts of people. And we have a massive increasing widened inequality around the world. And we would suggest that all of these are interconnected. And the biggest challenge is, how do we shift human consciousness to be able to approach and deal with those issues without being overwhelmed by them? And that means we have to be able to shift our thinking. Traditionally, since the Industrial Revolution, more and more through scientific thinking, we have learned to be linear atomized problem solvers, to break things down to their parts and solve them one at a time. Then in the 20th century was the beginning of system thinking, where we could see that wholes were more than the sum of the parts. You can't understand a bicycle, let alone a human being, by just taking it apart and looking at all the ingredients one by one. Because there are things that belong to the whole that are not contained in the parts. They're contained in the connections. But systems thinking is still coming from a mechanistic base. To move from systems thinking to systemic awareness, we have to not try and redress the problems just with our left hemisphere neocortex, but the whole of our brain, our intuitive knowing in our right hemisphere, the relational and intuitive connecting through our limbic brain that we share with all mammals, and our reptilian brain, and our heart and our gut, other forms of knowing. And systemic awareness is being aware that we are all nested within many systems, and I'll come back to that. But even beyond systemic awareness is how do we realize that the whole ecology is not a problem out there. We are part of it. The ecology is in us, not just us in the ecology. And many of these issues we as human beings see as being problems out there that we have to work out and solve. And we're also, one of the common things that happens is we only respond to crises when they're immediate and local. So in coronavirus, back in December when it was happening in China, we thought, oh, that's a problem from the other side of the world. That won't affect us. It was only in the UK when it started to come to Italy that we started to pay attention. It's only when it's immediate in terms of locality and in terms of time that we start to respond. If you go back, the pandemic may have been unprecedented, but it wasn't unpredicted. For the last 5 years, many people, including Bill Gates, have been saying it's not a matter of if, just a matter of when we will get a global pandemic. There were reports in the UK that were ignored in 2016. In 2019, they were told that it was likely to happen in the next couple of years. And our government said, we're too busy with Brexit to worry about pandemics. How wrong could they be? But this is not to blame them. This is a human reaction. We deal with things that are immediate in time and immediate in place. And if we're in coaching, there's several coaches online, we have to realize that we are never just coaching an individual. Because when an individual turns up, their team dynamic turns up inside them. The purpose of the team arrives. The organizational culture arrives inside them, their ethnic culture. All the stakeholder demands and needs turn up, and so does the wider ecology. And I love, and some of you have seen me use this slide before. I was teaching in New York, and my program started on Martin Luther King Day, January the 15th. And I thought I need to find a quote from this great civil rights leader. And I love this. All I'm saying is simply this, that all life is interrelated. In a real sense, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. And never has this been more true than with coronavirus, when we realize that our individual health is not our own. What we do about our health affects others. All our healths are interdependent. The health of the ecology and the health of human beings is totally interdependent. And I love how he goes on. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. I'm going to go over that one, but we will make the slides available. And here's a very different voice from Llewellyn Vaughan Lee, a Welsh mystic, who says, what is within us is within everything. And what is within everything, of course, is also within us. To realize that when someone comes to meet with you, it's not just an individual sitting opposite you. Their family system is inside them. Their culture. Krishnamurti, the great Indian mystic, said, we think our own thoughts. We don't. We think our culture's thoughts. And somebody once said to me, look, it's not my job to bring the ecology into the meeting room or into the coaching room, right? I should be on my coachee's agenda. And I said, but wait a moment, do your clients not eat? Do they not breathe? Because if they eat and breathe, the ecology is already in the room. It's just that we're not paying attention to it. All that's out there is also in here. And what is in here is interconnected with everything out there. And this means that we have to realize that we're used to thinking about how the individual is part of the team and the team part of the organization part of affected by the organizational culture that may come from the past. And that's part of a wider ecology, but we forget that it works the other way around, that all those things are being enacted. And I often realize, and quote Barry Oshery, who says, 95% of what happens in organizations is not personal, but we all take it personally. So every day when we get an email, we spend a response, then we don't get a response, we make up a story and we take it personally. He didn't respond to me because I'm not important. He didn't respond to me because he doesn't care about people. Rather than there may be many explanations and many conflicts that I deal with working with leaders and top teams in organizations are not interpersonal conflicts. I work with boards where chairmen and CEOs have conflicts, and it's often because the chairman is holding the needs of the regulator and the investor, and the CEO is holding the needs of the customers and the employees. And the rest of the board aren't stepping up to responsibility of how do we connect these different stakeholder needs. They're allowing it to be an interpersonal competition and conflict. So given all of this, how do we shift human consciousness? And that starts with ourselves. How do we resource ourselves to work from source? So let me tell you a little story. I was supervising a coach, and she turned up very flustered, very exhausted in my room on the edge of Bath in the UK. And she said, I'm so glad that I'm having supervision on my coaching. She said, because I'm so exhausted and burnt out from all the work I've been doing, supporting leaders and supporting teams. She said, I know every time I come to supervision, I feel re-energized and refueled. And it was the fact that she used the word refueled that really got to me that day. Because in the past, I would have heard her comment as flattering, that she so much enjoyed coming and having supervision sessions with me as a coach. But on that day, when she used the word refueled, I got worried. And I said to her, what you just told me worries me, because it sounds like you have a pattern that you use all your energy and outflow it to all the people you support. And then you come here to use non-renewable energy to fill up your gas tank with non-renewable energy. And perhaps we should spend this supervision not just refueling you, but look at how can you develop a solar panel at your heart, which means the work itself re-energizes you rather than depletes you. And this is also why I worry about so much that is written about life-work balance. It's based often on assumption that we go out and exhaust ourselves at work all week and then have time away to rebuild our energy. And the question I start to ask is, how do we not work from effort, but work from source? How can we have work re-energizing ourselves so that we arrive at the end of the week not depleted and having to drink alcohol or go in flat out in front of the television, but that the work itself is energizing and there's a natural life flow. And I'm going to share some ways about that. How do we rise to the 21st challenges without either pedaling harder and becoming more heroic or falling into victimhood and being overwhelmed? And how can we grow each of our individual capacities to resource ourselves more strongly? Now, I think this is true when we face the big challenges of our times, whether it's Black Lives Matter, coronavirus. We so easily can feel a victim to these challenges or overwhelmed. Or we could go into trying to heroically trying to solve them and save the ecology, as several people talk about. And what is the third option? Lovely quote here from Richard Stroitze Heckler. When we tie in with the life force, it rights us from our distractions and reconnects us to the rapture of life. And many of us go out into nature. I get very restored by having a very large walled garden where I grow most of our own food. I have a woodland, I have fields. I'm blessed with many natural resources around me that restore me. But how do I have those actually in every talk I give? How do I give the talk not from effort, but from source? So very simple thing I decided to do as we went into lockdown in coronavirus was to always ensure I had fresh flowers behind me. There was a lovely note on in the chat box on a last global webinar I did, because it was in the evening British time. The sun came round and was lighting up the flowers as I got darker and darker. And several people commented, how lovely, what a nice metaphor, that the spotlight is on the flowers, not on the speaker. How do we let life do the work rather than us? One of the very simple things that I teach over and over again is how, when people come and they talk about the toxic boss, the impossible customer, the dreadful employee, I say there is no such thing as an impossible boss, a terrible customer. There's just a mode of engagement we have not yet found. It may not be always true. I'm not saying it's an absolute truth, but it's a great attitude to start every day. That our biggest challenges are our best teachers. There's a lovely quote from the spiritual teacher Ram Dass, who said, "We all sign up at the school of life, but it's amazing how many of us spend our lives complaining about the curriculum that life provides." And every day, and I had a lovely conversations with Alper when he was driving me to the airport in Istanbul. And we got totally lost because we got so totally caught up. We missed the turning and ended up in great estate somewhere to the west of Istanbul. And he was saying, this is amazing. We all have our personal teacher, our personal tutor, who every day sends us some new action learning, a new challenge. And every night sends us some video resources in our dreams. So we are constantly having learning personalized to us and addressed to us. But most of us see it as problems to be solved, not lessons we are being offered. How do we treat each difficult person in our organization as our next teacher? how do we treat coronavirus as actually an opportunity to learn a new consciousness? How do we realize that coronavirus is actually bringing us the opportunity to realize that a small microscopic virus can be more powerful than we are, and to realize that we need to take humility in relation to the wider world? How do we treat coronavirus as, I've been working with several organizations. People asked about working virtually, and I've worked with many global organizations in the last 6 months, starting in January, and I was doing some sessions in China virtually. And they were first dealing with it. And it's amazing. I worked with one global company who said, we've been talking about having online meetings and using Microsoft Teams and Zoom for about 3 years. And now we put it into implementation within 2 weeks. And many of the organizations I worked with in China said, look, we've realized that we're more effective and we're not going to go back to working 5 days a week in the office. Because actually we've learned all sorts of ways of being a stronger team with us working from home. So, we're going to come into the office a couple of days a week. And rather than spend an hour and a half going through Beijing pollution to get to work and Beijing pollution to get home, we have learned how to be intimate, bonded, and purposeful and connected virtually. So questions we can ask ourselves and each other: how can your work energize you rather than drain you? How can we work together so that we can leave the meeting with deeper and greater meaningfulness in our work in life? Because what depletes us is when we're doing things which aren't linked to purpose, aren't linked to value, and aren't linked to meaning. As well as, how are we maintaining our health physically, mentally, and spiritually? And so if we go to supervision or coaching, these are all questions we can utilize. And so for instance, one of the things that's happened for me since coronavirus started is that immediately I ended up very quickly suffering, like many of you might be, from Zoomitis, spending 8-9 hours a day on the internet. And so I very quickly thought that I could do this. I spoke to my assistant. I said, look, I need to block out at least 1 hour, if not 2, in the middle of the day when I am outside. I changed my whole exercise regime. The fact that I'm not traveling, I've lost 1/10 of my weight. I've got fitter, and I'm still working 10-hour days, but not in a way that depletes me. And resilience, I love this quote from Michael Kavanagh, which I've adapted slightly. He works down in Sydney in Australia. Resilience is the capacity of any person, family, or team, or any other system to access and tap into unused and potential resources. Right? So resilience isn't about just growing your inner strength and flexibility. It's about how do you tap into all the resources that are out there that we're not utilizing. Give you one very simple example. When I was doing a lot of coaching with leaders in big places like Canary Wharf in London, and going up lifts into these very arid buildings, when I walked into the offices, I would always walk in with a person I was meeting with, and I would say, let's just walk to the window. What do you notice out of the window? What speaks to you from this whole scene out across London, or out across New York, or Singapore? How do we use the world around us to speak to us in the midst of the work? One coach I was working with, she said that with coronavirus, she's been meeting just for half an hour because many of the people she's been supporting got so busy. And what she suggested is that they went for a walk while they were doing their virtual session and used their phones and headpieces. But what she discovered is that because of all the demands, and they were walking and trying to get exercise, everything would speed up. So we worked together, and she explored this new experiment, which was at some point in the meeting to stop while they were both walking and say, could we just pause for one moment, look around, and ask the question, how is beauty speaking to us right now? Just so that we drink in all the resources that are constantly there in the world around us. But resilience can also be tapping into other resources. Every organization I work with around the world is having to do more at higher quality and often with less resource. And as we face the economic costs of coronavirus, this will become even more true. And that means we will not succeed by just pedaling harder and driving harder. We will have to look at enormous forms of innovation. And one of them is, how are we tapping into the unutilized resources? I was working with two Chinese companies, one of whom, their sales department arranges parties, because they say, actually, our customers do all our selling for us. We just have to support our best customers who do the selling by having parties and introducing them and getting them involved with our new products. And their research department set up global competitions, and they took their next R&D challenges and they put them out to the world to tap into the unutilized cognitive capacity of the world. That was their phrase, roughly translated. What a creative way of thinking. There is not a shortage of resources in the world. It's a matter of they're not always in the right place. How do we tap into them? The challenges of the world lie in the connections, not in the parts. So what I'm going to ask you to do, we won't do this in pairs and breakout because we don't have the time, but I'm going to ask you to do this live with me. I'm going to ask you to either sit or stand. You can stand if you want to for this. And I'm going to ask you just for, we'll keep the mics closed because otherwise there'll be a norm. Actually, no, let's open all the videos and all the microphones. That would be great. And I should stop sharing this. And we'll do this as an exercise.
So we cannot open the video for the attendees, but we can allow you to.
Because then we'll have a great little buzz. Because oh, great. So if you open all the mics, what I'm going to invite you to do is to take up, if you can open your videos, that would be great as well. And I can see, great, some people are opening their videos. Do open your videos. And I'm going to invite you just for 2 minutes to take the posture of how do you stand or sit when you're working from effort? How do you sit when you're working from effort and you're really focusing and you're trying hard and you're in a meeting and you're struggling? And really access what that's like in an embodied state. And, oh, we're getting a lot of feedback. Perhaps you better keep the mics closed. You can all do this in your own areas. We'll keep the mics closed because otherwise there's too much feedback. And I'd like you to think with your mics closed. So if we close all the mics, sorry, there's too much feedback. When you're working from effort, I'd like you just to complete the sentence for yourself out loud in your own room. When I work from effort, and accessing that physical stance that you get into. When I work from effort, I'll just do it as an example. When I work from effort, my shoulders come up. I screw up my eyes. I think hard with my neocortex. My heartbeat goes faster. I start to clench my fists. When I work from effort. So keep saying the line and see what comes. Say it 2 or 3 times out loud. When I work from effort, and see what comes up for you until you start to say something you hadn't previously thought. When I work from effort, I don't breathe so deeply. When I work from effort, I lose connection with the earth underneath me. When I work from effort, I stop noticing the world around me. When I work from effort, whatever comes. When I work from effort, I try and come up with a solution. When I work from effort, I try and solve problems. Okay, and pause. And anything that came up for you, just take a pen and paper and write down, or you can put it in the chat box. What did you discover about what happens when you work from effort? There's some already up there I see in the chat box. I disconnect from my body. When I work from effort, I function only with my brain energy rather than the full body. I sigh a lot and roll my eyes. I feel small. I feel that I'm pushing myself. Yes, pushing oneself is extraordinary, isn't it? Like who's pushing and who's being pushed? So somewhere we get split. I lose the ability to think clearly. I become negative. I wrinkle my forehead. Lovely. Great, great access. So now, take a big out breath. Make a noise. Just let everything go. And now I want you to take a sitting stance or a standing stance when you're working from source. Think about how you sit when you're working from source, how you're breathing, and just get that embodied state. So when I'm working from source, I'm really feeling the soles of my feet on the floor. I'm feeling really balanced on my legs. I'm opening my whole shoulders, and my heart is opening. When I work from source, my eyes are open and I'm feeling, I'm drinking in what's around me. I can see out the window. I can see the horizon. When I'm working from source, I have a sense of spaciousness. I feel when I'm working from source that it's not me doing the work. The work is being done. I'm midwifing the work, not having to deliver the baby. When I'm working from source, there's a sense of flow in me and between me and others. When I work from source, I'm breathing deeply. When I'm working from source, I'm not worrying about all the messages coming in on my mobile phone. When I'm working from source, I'm fully present. So again, just notice what comes for you. And when you get a chance, put that into the chat box or write it down for yourself. What did you discover? What are your keys to working from source? What are the signals that you're working from source rather than effort? Let's see what's coming in. I become one with myself and anyone else I'm working with. I feel happy, joyful, and focused. My heart melts into everyone and everything. So that sense of heart connection. I'm present and alive. I'm believing in processing myself. Yes, it's not just process. I'm not just trusting. I'm trusting life, that life knows more than I do. I'm smiling. These small cues are very important because they give us the access points. So for me, I know that taking a deep breath before I start a talk, making sure my feet are on the floor are ways in which I have to anchor and open myself to be fully present. I'm assertive and attentive to what is happening. Amin says, around me, and respond timely. I'm smiling. Now, the third bit of the exercise I want you to do is, having done those two, this time I want you to complete the sentence. How I could work more from source in my life and work is. How I could work more from source is. And keep saying it. And if nothing comes, keep saying that until you find a way of completing the sentence. How I could work more from source is. Pausing and taking a glass of water in the middle of a meeting. Making sure when I'm on Zoom, I've got a chair that has flexibility in it. Always having flowers that I can see behind me. Pausing and breathing. Really realizing that the person opposite me is not my customer, but my partner, and that we are doing the work together. How I could work more from source is realizing that life is doing the work and the teaching, not me. How I could work more from source is just keep yourself so you discover something new about something you could do which meant you were working more than from source. So there's some lovely ones coming in. Align my deeds with my values. I think you go even further, which is not just my values, but what is it, to connect with what is of value. Because what is of value is not just our values, but is what is being required in this moment. What will create, what is, so now when I'm starting a coaching session, I don't ask the person opposite me, what do you want to talk about? I ask, what is the work? What's the most valuable work we need to do together? And I'm not expecting them to have an answer, but I'm expecting that together we can discover that answer, because life will provide the agenda. I start leadership meetings not with a written agenda that's been created the previous week, but by asking, what's the work we need to do together that we cannot do apart, that will really create value for all our stakeholders? So in that one sentence, I'm taking us away from a written piece of paper into connection, but what is it we need to do? I'm interested in what's necessary, not what we want. Because if we can connect with what's necessary, what is our ecosystem requiring us to collaborate on today? That means we're working from source, not just source here, but source out there. We are in flow with what life is asking us to do. And then it becomes easy. Letting go of my fears and connect to the here and now. It's amazing how much fear drains us. And it's interesting, people talk about overcoming fear. And I realized after a while that again is working from effort to overcome our fears, to be courageous, rather to ask, how do we melt? How do we allow our fears to melt? How do we start to trust life not just trust our own willpower. Thank you for all those comments. Lovely. I hope you that was a helpful exercise. So let me just go back to sharing my screen. Now I've lost. There we go. And just bring this in the slides I'll give, I don't have time to go into now, is we also have to realize that often we are working with people who have been traumatized. And it's very easy, if we are using empathy, to also pick up on their trauma and to notice how we get triggered by other people. But I want to go on to just offering you 10 simple practices and ask you to choose one of these that you could build more into your life. We talked about connecting to source. Some people have an object or a practice they do before each meeting on Zoom. One of my colleagues has a stone that she holds, which connects her to that deep earth quality. A glass of water for every Zoom meeting, very important. I have my own little flask here that I keep topped up. Really important to have that sense of cleansing. To notice how we can get caught into dualistic language, or we could go into victimhood very easily, or heroicism. And how do we go from us in them language to we language? How do we, if we're coaches, how do we help life do the coaching rather than us do the coaching? To realize that coaching isn't just done by the coach, not just by the coach and coachee, but the third element is that how do we quickly in any meeting, whether it's a leadership meeting or a coaching session, get to the learning edge where we're both, neither of us has the answer. None of us have the answer, but we all realize that life is requiring an answer. And then we can look at how do we collaborate to do that? How do we realize that we need, if a lot of the 20th century was about how do we add to IQ with EQ, emotional intelligence, how do we move to WeQ, collaborative intelligence? We can't solve any of these issues alone. How do we recognize what takes us out of flow and out of working from source? What are our triggers? And how can we come back? What are our re-railing strategies to come back to source? How do we tap in through resilience? Some of you may be doing mindfulness practice, breathing practice, where we breathe into the experience of the other, but we then breathe it out, we let it go. Tonglen is a Buddhist practice. But the one I'm particularly wanting to offer you today is wide-angled empathy. It is so easy when we've been trained to have empathy for the people who are immediately around us, our colleagues, the members of our team, but not have empathy for other parts of the system. So if you're a coach, you can hear stories from your coachee about, this awful boss they have, and this awful part of the organization, and you start to see the world through their eyes. You start to believe their narrative is reality. And a great practice is to have as much empathy for everybody in the other person's story as you do for them. Not just every other person, but every other part of the system. And you can practice this. Let me just mention this. You can practice this. And I often say the best place to practice is to watch the television news and to set your stopwatch on your mobile phone and to see how many seconds or how many minutes you can go having empathy and compassion for everybody in that news bulletin, every country, every government, every system. Not just for the ones you agree with, not just for the victims. I mentioned that my record is 5 minutes, 20 seconds before I started becoming reactive. And that was on one occasion. It's a tough practice, but gradually you can increase your ability to watch how you get triggered and how to stay with compassion and what I call wide-angled empathy. And the final resourcing practice I'm offering you is systemic hope. There's a lovely book by Joanna Macy and can't even think of her colleague, Chris Johnson, called Active Hope. It's all about how do we face the ecological crisis without going into either overwhelm, despair, grief, or anger and blame. And systemic hope is not a hope in any government or any leader or any organization. It's actually the hope that actually the larger system knows far better than we do. It's trust in the largest ecosystem. And it's a focus on the fact that life is a generous teacher. And if you can start each day with that, it's an incredible resourcing practice. I'm aware I've left very little time, but what questions have come in? And has anyone got their hand up who'd like to ask a question live? And because we started a few minutes late, can we just go a few minutes over? Great.
Yeah, absolutely. So each of you also has your microphone access. So if you would like to ask a question live or share a comment live, you can also choose to unmute yourself so we can actually hear some of your voices. And to the first question asked in the chat, yes, there will be a recording of the session, and I'll be sharing the link on our YouTube channel with you by email.
And all these slides will be available. So let's come out of that and just see what questions are coming in. So any questions that anyone, or put your hand up if you would like to ask a question live. So do be brave and unabashed.
Hi, Peter. This is Amin from Singapore.
Amin, lovely to hear you.
Thank you. And I'm with the GTCI group. So my question is, I think you answered partially earlier about fear. And I think you said something beautifully here. I took some notes. It's how to let go of our fears and connect, but more how do we start life? And I couldn't catch the rest. Can you please quickly elaborate again about fear?
We did a lot of work at one stage on different emotional rhythms. And I know some of you may have done this with me. And people asked about fear. And I think often there are different sorts of fear. And it's when something is starting to flow and we don't trust it, we pull back on it. So, you know, you could get fear of joy when you're just going into elation and you think, oh gosh, you know, I better not get too elated because it will all end in tears, as my mother used to say. And you pull back, or we can feel a real natural flow of anger about a situation, and then we get frightened of our anger and where it may go, and we pull back. So often fear is a holding on to a flow within us. And so what I talk about is not sort of pushing through or overcoming, which is still effortful, but how do we melt the fear? How do we notice the fear? And ask just a simple question when we notice it coming into our body. What am I really frightened of? What am I not trusting in life right now? Because it's a natural human, not to judge our fear, not to say we shouldn't be frightened, but to have compassion for our own fear and to see how can what am I not trusting right now? How can I trust that? How can I just let go a little more? How can I let go of the grip? Yeah. Because the fear isn't a problem, because fear actually is a necessary thing. You know, our amygdala reactivity keeps us alive. It helps us deal when there is a crisis. But what the problem is when we tighten around that fear, we put a grip around it, our whole body holds on to it rather than listens to it, attends to it, and then lets it go. I hope that's helpful. Amin.
Very helpful. Thank you so much.
What other questions? Anyone else who? Two participants have raised their hands. So,
Hi.
Yes, go ahead, Lola.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this amazing webinar. I work as an executive coach in Hong Kong. And at the moment, understandably, something which comes very often is help us get our team, because everyone's really kind of they figured it out. We want our team to develop an entrepreneurial spirit, a proactive spirit, a can-do attitude. And these organizations are asking for a quick fix. Yet the culture which has been in these organizations up to now, and the message given to the people has been it's top-down leadership.
the very simple one, Lola, is with any team, if you want to be entrepreneurial, is to actually start by asking the question, who and what does our team serve? Who do we create value for? What can we uniquely do as a team that the world of tomorrow needs? These are such important questions, because it means then our entrepreneurialness is both collaborative internally as a team. You know, what could we do together we cannot do if we work in parallel? It's another great question. But it means our entrepreneurialness is not only collaborating with each other, it's collaborating with what's required from our ecosystem and our stakeholders in the future. You know, a good entrepreneur, and I'd like to think in my life, you know, I've started several organizations as an entrepreneur, but it's not that I've set out with a mission. It's because I've discovered there's a need in the world that I couldn't find anyone else stepping up to. So I then had to say, well, who can I get around me to collaborate to respond to that need? If you're responding to tomorrow's need, you know, you're more likely to be an entrepreneur than if you're trying hard with effort to win greater market share in today's game. Is that helpful?
Yes, it is. I was also zooming in on the fact that this is not a quick process. When the culture has traditionally been, I tell you what to do, to actually jump to a culture where I want you to bring your ideas forward. It is a process.
Yes, and it does mean that we have to help all leaders realize that the day of the heroic leader is gone, and the day of the role of the leader is to be looking future back and outside in, framing the challenges. So step one for a leader is to say, look, these are the challenges that I'm seeing. What challenges are you seeing? But then step two is to say, and I need all your help in addressing them. And very few leaders have really learned how to ask for help from their hearts. If you really, as a leader, ask for help from your heart, people will respond. And not just as a leader, whoever we are, if you can ask for help with humility from your heart, it's the greatest leadership skill that I think we can develop.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Peter.
I think we've got time for one more.
Yeah, I see one more question. Tess, would you like to go ahead?
Hello, hi, Peter. Hi, it's Tessa here from London. Thank you for thank you for an amazing session. I really enjoyed it. Something that is really weighing on my heart, and that is this whole thing about communities that really are not engaging fully, either because they don't have access or they can't afford to. So, for instance, I went to my hairdresser before lockdown and listened to the conversation she was having about how she was going to put food on the table for her children that night. And it was a distinction between having food on the table or having the lights on. And that was how basic it was. And this week I watched Anthony, which was based on a true story of a guy, an 18-year-old boy, black boy, who was killed in Liverpool, and he was running away from the people who were attacking him. So somewhat similar to the Stephen Lawrence story. So it really are your thoughts in this kind of systems that that there's poverty and there's also discrimination, which people can be killed for just being a different color from what is considered the right color in inverted commas.
Yeah, and thank you for that. Let me say two responses. One of the big issues I think we have to deal with in the world is privilege. My wife, Judy Ride, wrote a book, White Privilege Unmasked, where she says, look, we have to face up to those of us who are white, that there is slavery is not just a thing of the past, it's still happening. We are still living off the economic benefits. And I have this very simple phrase which says, and there's privilege that comes from being a man, there's privilege that comes from being white, there's privilege that comes from having a good education. And I have a little phrase which said, when I was young, I thought privilege would buy me freedom. Now I've got to 70, I realize privilege did not buy me freedom, it buys me responsibility. So I think one of the big issues we've got to do, those of us who coach privileged people, who are privileged ourselves, is look at how do we take responsibility for our privilege. So that's my first response. My second is, there is something about resilience, which is about how do we get resources from where they are to where they needed to be. We are not short of food, energy, and I mean renewable energy, water, or anything in the world. It's just, it's not getting to the right where it's needed. And I was working with a group that were working on poverty in a city. And what we looked at is how they could have the food banks connected to the allotments where people were growing food, and how people who were getting food from the food banks would also spend time working on the allotments because they had the resource of time, and how that could be connected to a community kitchen, and how they could tap into people in the community with a competition, right, for coming up with recipes that could be done by poor families, which would be healthy recipes and could be less than so many, less than £5 for a family of four, or $5, I think it was, because it was in America. And by connecting the food bank, the allotments, and people on the allotments giving time to help people learn how to grow their own food, the local restaurants donating some of their time as chefs to work in the community kitchen and teach people how to cook food. What we were doing is we were creating a whole circle of resource, which was tapping into spare capacity, right? And not just trying to solve the hunger of today, but create a whole different community responsiveness. And I think it's those sorts of systemic solutions that we need to foster and think about. And that's just one simple example. I don't know if you want to come back on that, Tessa.
Yeah, I actually love what you said, because I read your wife's book. I didn't make the connection, and what you have said makes sense, because it's something that can be done. But it does mean that we as, and I could include myself in that we have to let go of thinking the same ways that we have thought, and be open to new ways, and sharing that platform, by letting go of, by acknowledging the privilege to increase access.
Yeah, and that starts with, the thing I have to work on constantly is just to recognize that all the privilege I have, and I have an enormous amount of privilege, a lot of that has not come from my efforts. It's come from being fortunate enough to be born in the family I was born in, the education I received, the country I was born in, the gender and color I was born in. And all of that has provided, life has provided my privilege. And that means I've got to think Now that's an energy resource. What am I doing with it? What am I doing with it? And where is it needed?
That's lovely.
That's a question we never get to an end answer with. It's a daily question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's so helpful and so insightful and also so doable.
And I'll just give you one example. My wife and I, because of coronavirus, where we live is a very large property in a beautiful location. And we run courses here. There's some people here who've been on courses here who are on this call. And because of coronavirus, we can't do it because there's not the space to do social distancing. My wife said, look, we cannot justify morally living in such a property if we're not using it for people. What can we do? So we thought about this long and hard. So what I've just set up is study retreat scholarships, where people who are looking at how to shift human consciousness to address those 7 major global challenges could come here. We could take 3 at a time on study writing retreats. And in return, they will have to come up with a new paper and a video blog on how we shift human consciousness. But that was because it started from my wife challenging our privilege.
Yeah.
And what do we do with it?
Yeah.
And that's where it goes back to entrepreneurialism. If we start with those questions, you end up having to be entrepreneurial. You don't have to force entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's really heartening as well.
We just have to start with the right questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
And life is giving us those questions all the time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this morning or this evening or this afternoon from many parts of the world. And all I'll ask you to do is to go away and write down one practice you are going to experiment with, and you're going to experiment with in the next 3 days. Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's only, nothing that I have said to you today is true, right? It's only true if you take it into your lives, do something with it, and discover your truth with it. The words don't change the world. The experiments and the practices do. I wish you well. Thank you for joining us. May you have
everyone.
A rich and resourced life.
Thank you, everyone. And of course, a really, really big thank you to you, Peter. I think it was great. And I think also thank you, Tessie, for also inviting us to think about our responsibility of privilege as well. So I think a fantastic session. We will be uploading and sharing it with you. And maybe in closing, I can ask you to just all unmute yourself and say a bye to the group and a thank you to Peter and the group as well. It'd be great to hear you all.
Thank you so much from Singapore.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Stay safe.
Dankjewel, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much.
Dankjewel, Peter. Hoi.
Thanks from Paris. Bye-bye.
Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, everyone.
Laura, can you save the chat box for me and email it to me?
Yes, I can also do that.
That would be great. Thank you very much. And thank you for hosting.
Great
Very
session.
welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Charmaine.
All the way from South Africa. It was awesome. Thank you.
Bye, Danke. It's a country I've done a lot of work in, as you know, I think.
Yes. Looking
And
forward
nice-
to having you back here when this virus is over.
Someday, hopefully.
Keep
And nice-
well.
And nice to see you online as well, Belinda. Right, I must go.
All right. Thank you. We'll be closing the session.
Bye.